So let me offer some super fast definitions. Bias, I define as not meaning it. It's usually unconscious, and it's not really a belief that we believe when we examine it. Whereas prejudice is meaning it. This is a stereotype that we do believe that we'll stand behind. Whereas bullying is being mean with the intent to cause harm. And so how can we respond? First of all, how can we distinguish between the three? Because it's not always totally clear. So I'll give you want a bias story? I'll tell you a bias story.
I mean, I want a story for all of them, actually. But
okay,
yeah.
I'll give you 3 stories to help distinguish.
Yeah, because I do think the words are very emotionally charged words,
yes.
But I think the practical element of them can happen super subtle, right? It can happen without you even knowing it's happening. And it could be bullying and you're trying to be funny, right? And that it can happen super easy, right? So I'm super interested in unpacking it because the words are big, but I think that everyone probably has something that they're doing that they don't even know they're doing. So yeah, the stories I think would be super helpful just to really get people understanding it a bit more.
Yeah. So one of my favorite examples of how an upstander can change bias in a situation comes from Aileen Lee, who founded Cowboy VC. And she was going into a meeting with 2 colleagues who were men. And she had the expertise that was going to win her team the deal. And so they file in, and Aileen sits in the middle of the table and her 2 colleagues sit to her left. And then the other side comes in. First person sits across from the guy to Aileen's left. The next guy sits across from the guy to his left. And then everybody else files on down the table, leaving Aileen dangling by herself at the end. And so very often that's how bias manifests. It's just in where we sit, the assumptions we make and where we sit. But Aileen was not to be deterred. She's a determined person. And so she started talking. And when the other side had questions, they directed them at the 2 men who she was with and not at her, even though she was the one talking. And it happened once, it happened twice, it happened a 3rd time. And her business partner stood up and he said, I think Aileen and I should switch seats. And they did, and the whole dynamic in the room changed. So that was all he had. That's what I call an I statement. That was all he had to do to help the other side become aware of what they were doing and to stop doing it as soon as they became aware. And he did it for 2 reasons. One was he cared about Aileen and he didn't like seeing her get ignored. But 2 was he just wanted to win the deal. And he knew that if he couldn't get them to listen to her, they wouldn't win the deal. And so that is a simple example of an I statement that invites the other people in to understand things from your perspective.
This is for bias, right? So
for bias, yeah. This is sort of an I statement is a good response if you think what you saw was bias.
Okay, so basically, we're talking about the bias and we're saying, cool. So if you notice it, right? That's the first part, is to notice the bias, but then to solve the bias is to say, hey, and you finish that sentence, I think this should change. Yeah. I think that something should happen. Yeah. But how do you be aware of the biases? Because that's a good story, but that's a story of one thing that we see. Where are the other things that we don't? It's
unconscious. So almost by definition, we don't notice it when we. This is why I think, and this is something that leaders can do. Some people can become more self-aware and stop their biases that way. Most of us need other people to point them out to us. And so one of the things that leaders can do, because I had to think a lot about, and talk to a bunch of people to get to that Aileen Lee story, because it doesn't happen more often than not. Nobody says anything, and so one of the things that leaders can do to help it become more likely that upstanders will stand up to bias, will point it out, is what I call to create a system of bias disruptors.